Hello, class. Today we're going to talk about something that made an enormous impression on me since I first heard it. Something that is at once, I guess we could say it's definitive of the type of music that it is, in that there hasn't really been a whole lot else like it, if not really anything else that's like it. And in that, outside of the people who are making this kind of music and this music in particular, hasn't really been a whole lot of other examples of. We're going to talk about today UX. Can you see that? Ultimate Experience. Dragonfly, 1997. Now, who is UX? Well, UX is Chris Kilvin, also part of the Faith Healers, Subunity Network Experience, and Eon Project. And he's also probably been involved in some other things too. But those are the main ones I want to point out. Pete Martin, which is also known as Slide, and another fellow named RX Heaven, RX7, which is funny. And he's a really great guy too. And the three of those three people together made this, UX, the Ultimate Experience album, Dragonfly Records, 1997. This was the only UX album. This was it. There was just one of these. And I'm kind of glad that there was just one of these, because this is so distinctive that here, I'll take it out of the thing. It's so distinctive that to do anything more with this, or to do anything else like it, may or may not have really worked out, or may not have been as cohesive as this was. However, in 2012, UX got a facelift into the modern age with the UX Reloaded album, which released on Kiss the Sound in 2012. Took classic UX tracks and revamped them, and some unreleased stuff too, and revamped them with a bit more of an epic twist to them. A bit more, took the same, basically remastered tracks, but then with a little touch of postmodernism added to them to just sort of beef them up just a little bit. Not remixes and not complete reworkings of the tracks. The original tracks, but with a modern twist to them. Like, for example, the epic reload of Master of the Universe took that track, which in itself was pretty much perfection, and they just added enough to it to make it even more just kind of beautiful and scary, which was just amazing in my opinion. There is the Odyssey album in 2015 on Anjuna, the Lazarus Rising, these might be EPs, in 2016 on Neo Goa label, and Realm of a New Dawn last year in 2019, also on Neo Goa. Anjuna also released some Nervous System, the Time Travel LP, and the Neo Goa label is interesting. It's mostly the Neo Goa label has released a veritable grip of releases. The list is huge of stuff that they've done. It's mostly an old Goa sound, but with a newer, polished aspect. And if I remember, I'll try to get to Neo Goa label at the end of the review. So, let's talk about the music, class. According to Discogs, quote, typical dark sound with touches of industrial and rock. Now that's interesting, because this is not typical at all. This is not typical. Where they got it right, touches of industrial, well, I'll meet them halfway on that. actually, because this is very heavily industrial psychedelic trance, what I would call cyber trance, or even Goa Ultrabeat, which takes the cyber aspect of it and puts it into takes the aspects of dark Goa, but with a very heavy sample driven. Um, I'm trying to look here. It describes a dark post-apocalyptic cyber matrix world, but it does it flawlessly. And what is it about this that is so flawless? Well, it is the very driving synth driven slash oriented music. Okay, I've touched on before in other videos about Chris Kilvin and Pete Martin, and those two people's synth programming styles are very similar. Like if you listen to Slide, listen to UX or anything else that Chris has done, um, most of, maybe with the exception of the Faith Healers, this Distributed Network Experience, an Eon project, and then put on some Slide after that, you'll notice that the synth programming, the synth lines and the bass lines are very similar. And so those two people together working on this album complemented each other perfectly, absolutely perfectly. Um, like I said, this is a dark post-apocalyptic cyber matrix world, right? The samples are machines, movie sound effects, people talking about aliens, lots of weird movie noise of crashes and explosions and dark, ominous iterations by people. You know, this is really some dark shit here. And when I heard this for the first time, I was scared. I was a little freaked out, and I was scared. You know, it's scary because there's no light in this. I mean, it's not uplifting. It's driving. It's not uplifting. This is dark in tone, and it's a little uncertain. You know, it describes a post-apocalyptic future. You know, and I think in order to do that, you need to get a little industrial. You know, not not quite as industrial as like Front 242. I mean, those guys were super dark and with that dark beauty thing, and I love Front 242. You know, but like, what if you took like the kind of scary dark cyber aspect of it and turned it into dark Goa? Then you'd have this. This is very synthesizer driven work. This music is powered by synthesizers and synth lines, and there hasn't been hardly anything that's been so driven by. I mean, if you want to hear what synthesizers can do and what good you want to have a get a taste of what good synthesizer sequencing and programming can sound like, this is where you want to go. Of course, let's not forget that this album in 1997 was released on Dragonfly, back to back between Palladian's IFO and Shakta's Silicon Trip album, and they must have had. I mean, I talk about futurism, but these guys, the label must have had some foresight into, okay, well, we've got these three releases that complement each other in the catalog so well. Why not just release them at the same time? Because IFO is synth driven, this is synth driven, and certainly Seb Taylor's Shakta album Silicon Trip is very synth driven. Seb Taylor is a very good synthesizer sequencer, and his programming is amazing and very distinctive too. 3 albums released back to back to back that are very synthesizer driven. And without repeating myself, this is perfectly layered, very dark, but it's catchy. Like it'll get you going. Even though you might not know, like you're stepping through like the Stargate into the world of Rusty Pipes and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I mean, however, this is straight up genius synth programming in this, and it complemented the other two releases at the time very well. One of the things that Chris does is transposing, and you hear that in Subunity Network, and you hear that in this too. And transposing, if you don't know, so let's just say you have a bass line, or like the root key of your track is C, right? And then so if you want to transpose it, you'll go up or down on the or not the octaves, but in the scale. I'm not good at that kind of stuff, but at least I know that, okay, so we're running along at C. Now we're going to transpose up 3, so that would be sharp D. It would be like 3, 5, and 7, so you might go up to sharp D, E flat, right? So you'll go up 3, and then you'll run that for a while, and then you'll go back down again. And what that does is it drives and extends the measures, so that you don't have to necessarily do a program change and switch to another synth line. You keep that one going, you just transpose it, keep it going, because it's almost, when you do that, you're still hanging on to what's playing. What's playing hasn't changed, it's just gone up, a few notes, a few semitones, and you hang on to that, and there's a little bit of uncertainty, like, okay, well, we were here, now we're here, and you wait for it to come back down again, and there it goes. And so there's a lot of that in this album, a lot of that in Subunity Network. Hardly any staccato anything, especially in the synth lines. I don't think there's any staccato 64, 32, 32nd, 64 notes in this album. The drums might do that roll here and there, but not like Pleiadians or maybe like Hallucinogen. Excuse me, I just had dinner. What I've done with that staccato thing where you get 32nd notes, mostly everything runs at 16th notes, and then you want to get those little triplets or those quads in there, that kind of a thing. Transpositions is what happens in this music. Wicked bass lines, constant sound effects, nothing boring. And 1997 was for sure the peak year, and these 3 releases, UX, IFO, and Silicon Trip, were at the height of it, for Dragonfly anyway. After these came out, that label started toning it down. A lot of other labels really started toning it down. 1997 was the peak year for dark Goa. And Chris's music in particular, respect to Pete Martin and to RX Heaven too. This music has had a very long-lasting residue, a very long-lasting effect, and it's very powerful. This is very, very powerful, very well layered, very smartly programmed cyber psychedelic trance, or Goa trance, I should say. This is like dark Goa Ultrabeat, cyber Matrix. This is Neo putting on the glasses and flying in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. That's what this is. And I highly, highly recommend listening to this if you haven't ever heard of it. Some were released with a card that has the notations in it. Mine has the card. I'll take it out and show you real quick. Pretty cool. It's got the card on here. The graphics done by somebody named Buggy G Riphead. So they and shout out to whoever Buggy G Riphead is, because like Mark Neal, it's very. Look at this for 1997. This is old school graphics, but it looks so awesome. It really describes the music here. Maybe these 3 spheres are the 3 people in UX, and here they are flying through the world. Funny thing about my particular copy of this album, I sent it off to Chris several years back for it to be autographed, And whatever country he was living in Eastern Europe, for whatever reason, uh, customs or the mail, the post office wouldn't let him have it. I mean, it was addressed to him. He went down there to go pick it up. They said, no, you can't have it for whatever reason. They wouldn't let him have it. All I wanted it to do was to have him open it up, sign it, and then send it right back to me. But they wouldn't let him have it. So all he could do was send it back to me. So it's almost like I got this from him, which is kind of funny. I mean, I wish they'd have let him have the thing. It's just a record, you know. But no, they wouldn't let him have it. So all he could do was just send it back. So it's like I got it from him. So that's kind of neat. That's kind of a funny story behind this particular copy of it. So, yeah. I mean, Dragonfly was one of the first Goa labels to come out and start releasing stuff, if not the first one. They used to be known as Butterfly, and then they changed it to Dragonfly. I guess that was a little bit darker, maybe a bit more catchy than Butterfly. But even if it had still been Butterfly, I still would have got it. So the Neo Goa label is interesting because, like I said, Lazarus Rising and Realm of a New Dawn was released on Neo Goa. And those aren't bad releases. They stand out against the rest of what's been released on that particular label. And, like I usually talk about, it doesn't really, the majority of what's been released on that label doesn't really impress me a whole lot. Because the magic of old Goa, the magic of dark Goa, in particular stuff like this, was done differently than it has been doing now, and the way that the music has changed. This was all MIDI. This was MIDI and CV. This was probably a computer sequencer. This was out of the box music. This was MIDI gear. This was samplers, sequencers, drum machines, effects, all that stuff in the MIDI chain. Run by people and programmed in the computer, which is just telling everybody what to do. And that is what sets this sound apart from anything made after around 99, 2000, when computers really started to come into their own for music making, for electronic music, and started to become more powerful, and less things out of the box and more things in the box. And the out of the box aspect, I mean, there is a lot of good in the box music, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of it. You can be quite creative with a lot of with the computer. If you do it right, you can do some really cool stuff. But when you try to go back and you try to emulate what was being done back in the day with what's available now, it's going to sound different. This is polished, but it's not polished the way that digital music that has been mastered digitally, and this was mastered digitally, of course, but it wasn't made digitally. It was made analog. And when music is made analog, if you come back and try to do it a different way, it's not going to sound the same way. It's going to lose some of that magic. It's going to lose some of that analog effect. And analog doesn't just mean the gear; it also means the experience too. It also describes a certain feel of what of limitations of gear are very important. Because computers don't really have a lot of limitations, and limitations in music limitations in music gear can heavily determine what you can and can't do with that equipment, and it forces you to become more creative and more and it manifests things like ingenuity, and innovation, because you need to be able to, you want to make this sound, you want this to do this, but it kind of doesn't do it. So you have to figure out how to get around it and how to do that. And all this old music from the 90s is that's always happening in this kind of music. And the fact that they could push the envelope so far with so many releases, the notable ones at any rate, and especially with something like this, is quite remarkable in my opinion. And it deserves to be talked about, and it deserves some attention. And UX is nothing new. I mean, this album is definitely seminal, for Dark Goa, Cyber Goa, Ultrabeat. And lots of people. Chris is huge. Pete Martin was huge too. But Chris is still around, and Chris is still doing stuff, and he's a great guy. He's very talented. He's absolutely one of the masters of his craft. Mostly drumming, but I mean, of course, he can program too. He can program synthesizers just fine. Listen to Community Network, listen to UX, you'll be like, wow, you will. There wasn't a whole lot of, excuse me. My only lament is that there wasn't enough of this really majestical synth programming, synthesizer-driven music as there was in releases like this. So, at any rate, UX, ultimate experience. Our experience is your experience. By the future, to the future. Is that what it says? For the future, to the future. Our experience is your experience. Catch you later.